Hello everyone. So welcome back to Two at a Time series. And yes, I know I'm resuming this after a month-long pause. And it wasn't a conscious decision to pause the series, but I think the entire month of November has been a snowstorm. It has been a bag of surprises with lot of things happening on lot of fronts, both professional and personal. We saw in the month of November the results coming out of the mains 2025. And yes, it has been a mixed bag of emotions. Few emotions like gratitude, happiness for the students who have qualified for the interview, and the next set of emotions, which is bordering on disappointment, setback, and sadness for the students who couldn't qualify to the next stage. So, yes, I didn't even realize the entire month has passed by, the month of November. But yes, with new energy, with new commitment to continue the series, I'm standing here in front of you on 1st of December with the remaining topics of CSE 2024. So, the part 1 of CSE 2024 essay paper I have already discussed. Today, I'm picking up topic 2 and topic 6, that is topic 2 from section A and topic 6 from section B to discuss. So, let's start the discussion. And yes, I really want to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank one of my student who reached out to me over Telegram, and he messaged me saying that, ma'am, why aren't you continuing with the Two at a Time series? And he told me that he's really benefiting from it. So I was like, yes, I have not paused it. I have not, stopped it. I will be continuing it. It's just that I'm so much caught up in other commitments and obligations that I wasn't able to find time to shoot the video. So, yes, I'm really thankful to that student who reminded me that many of you are counting on me, counting on this particular series Two at a Time to prepare for UPSC CSE essays. And his one particular feedback really touched my heart. He told me that he was really benefiting from it because the way I was discussing the topics in detail, the way I was putting out the arguments and examples. So, yes, thanks to you and thanks for that reminder. I'm really grateful that you all are benefiting from this series. And on that point, I want to start the discussion. So, yes, the essay paper of CSE 2024, in the section A, we had the topic 2, which is the empires of the future will be the empires of the mind. Now, before I start the discussion, it's very important for me to tell you one thing. I have observed in many essay copies that many students did not feel comfortable or do not feel comfortable remembering and recalling a lot of different quotes. So, one smart move that they do, or the smart action that they take, is that they tend to use their UPSC previous year essay topics as quotes in their essay, which is totally fine. But if you don't know who has given that quote, if you're just mentioning it as a sentence or as a phrase, then it's an incomplete job. So, if you're that kind of student who's not able to remember a lot of different varieties of quotes, it's okay. You can use the previous year essay topics as quotes in your essay, but please do one more effort, one more step on top of it, which is know who has said the quote. So, this quote has been said by Winston Churchill, okay, the ex-prime minister of England, so the Great Britain actually. So the empires of the future will be the empires of the mind. And yes, the real context in which this quote or this sentence was spoken is not known, but in today's time I think this quote really stands true. So I think it is more relevant in today's time rather than the time in which it was actually said. So the topic is the empires of the future will be the empires of the mind. And if you remember, I have already, I want to always start the discussion with the aspect of keywords and phrases, and even jotting down the ideas which is coming in my mind when I first look at the topic. So let's understand what are the keywords and phrases. Of course, empires of future, empires of mind, and in itself, the empire keyword is equally important, right? So empires of future, empires of mind. Why this phrase is important? Because empire of future, empire of mind is conveying a different meaning altogether. Okay, what is the theme and the category in which under we can place this essay topic? So one major theme is, of course, human intelligence, because it's been said that the empires of future will be based out of the empires of human mind, of course, right? Human mind. So that means the intellectual power, the progress, the innovations, the setting up of these systems, the society will be running on the aspect of human intellectual power. Okay, so the human intelligence is the theme, underlying theme of for this topic. Then mind as ultimate weapon. This is also, I would say, that in a way is conveying the theme for this topic. Now we need to understand that when we first look at the topic, what ideas are coming into my mind. So of course, when I'm reading the topic, the phrase, the word is very important, empire, right? So for me, what does an empire mean? So empire, of course, conveys that there has to be an emperor. It means that a region or set of people under domination or rule of someone, and that someone is an emperor. So for me, this definition of empire is very important, because yes, I know that this definition is not the core demand of the topic, but without this definition, I will not be able to set context. I will not be able to start my essay. Okay, so knowing the definition, and by definition I mean to say not the exact definition, of course you know the concept of empire and emperor, so in a way just use that concept to frame a definition for yourself. Okay, so this is something which is important, that okay, what is an empire and who is ruling over it. Then for me, when I read the topic, what other ideas come into my mind is that the aspect of human intellectual power. So if I'm trying to say that the empires of the future will be empires of mind, that means empires of the future will be based out of human mind, human intellectual power. So human intellectual power is one of the ideas that came into my mind. Of course, by this I can take out a synonym, which is the human ingenuity, human intelligence. Okay, then territorial conquest to cognitive driven power. So in a way, because I have my definition of empire and emperor ready in my mind, from that I can set the further context. I can take the discussion to further step, which is that this topic is trying to convey that there's going to be a huge difference between the empires of the past and empires of the future. So there is no mention of the phrase empire of the past, but in a way, the empire of the future phrase holds hint in itself that you should also discuss how did or what did the empires of the past look like, or they were framed, they were settled, the empires were made using what. So earlier it was mostly territorial conquest, but right now, post World War II, post UN and all of that, League of Nations and all that, the hierarchy and the sequential aspect of the UN. So now we can't really have empires. So the future empires would look like what? They would be based out of what? They would be based out of cognitive driven power. When you use your mind, the intellectual aspect to exert dominance, to exert power, right? So from territorial conquest using armies, cavalry, artillery, infantry, we have come to a point where now we are using human intelligence, human driven technological progress, scientific innovations and discoveries to exert dominance, to exert power upon other societies, other civilizations, other cultures, other countries and regions, right? So this is what I have understood from the topic, that you need to move on from territorial conquest to cognitive driven power or cognitive driven conquest over the other people's minds, right? So the empire of the future will be the empires of the mind. Okay, This is what I have understood. Now, old empires were what? They were made out of forced, they used to use muscle power, they used to use force, they used to use violence, they subjugated the people, right? So that all idea has come to my mind. And of course, they were using what? Naval superiority, they were using artillery superiority, right? We have seen lot many examples. Even you could say the Mughals using different kinds of artillery, the Britishers using different kind of artillery. So that has been, you could say, the aspect of the old empires, that they tend to use violence, they tend to use that technology, which was of course in a way turning muscle power or turning the impact of power into subjugating the people, right? Then this entire topic also gives me this idea that now the empires of mind, or the future empires, the present to future empires, will be based out of knowledge economy, soft power, empire of future. That means it is based out of the mind, which is the knowledge plus technical know-how superiority. That's what we are seeing, that post decolonization, post World War II, the scientific innovations and discoveries have led to hard powers exerting their soft power also through such kind of technological progress and innovations, right? And then of course, because mind, so all of this discussion also led me to the aspect of brain gain, right? So people who have such kind of intellectual power, if all that human resource, if all that human capital is present in certain country, or any country can attract such kind of people, of course it will be superpower. Of course it will have significant soft power, and it can use that soft power, it can use that human intellectual power, it can use developed human capital to turn its soft power into even hard power. So ultimately, the empires of future will be the empires of mind, based on the power of human intellectual, human ingenuity, and that human capital. And that is why for me this term brain gain is very important. When I was brainstorming, when I was thinking about the topic, that okay, what all could I understand from it, right? So this is the first step. Those who are regular with the series, you would understand how I proceed. So by keywords, my theme, essence, all that is covered. Now we come to the aspect of that, for the body content, what should be our major arguments. I hope you're able to see the screen properly. Okay. So yes, now, as you know, my initial 1-2 arguments, especially the first argument, is always to set the context. I don't jump directly into the core idea of the topic. I save it for my either second or third argument. So my first argument is usually about the underlying essence, the underlying hidden keyword or hidden meaning of the topic, so that I can start my discussion from there and I'm able to write sufficiently 1,000+ words in the essay, right? So here, my first argument is decoding the aspect, decoding the concepts, decoding the meaning of empires and how are they actually built. So going by the definition, going by the concept of empire, I'm trying to establish my first argument, and then I want to write all of this explaining the concept of empire. So an empire is actually what? It is a political unit or an entity consisting of diverse territories. So you do understand that an empire consists of a huge, a very, huge area, region, and of course within that there could be a lot of diversity among the cultures, even religion, people, languages for that matter, right? So it's a political unit or entity, but consisting of diverse territories ruled, dominated by a central authority or an emperor. So it has to have a wide region, a wide area under its control, but then it is ruled, the power, the authority is centralized. So there's one emperor, there's one person, there's one king for the entire empire, and that's why you have empire and emperor, right? You don't call the king, then you call the emperor. So it is ruled and dominated by the central authority. What are the major characteristics of any empire? The conventional sense of the empire, right? So the major characteristics is that it has vast geographical reach. It has a an area covering a lot of a lot of kilometers, a huge area. So an empire has a vast geographical reach. It has a centralized control, and it has considerable influence or control over political, economic, culture, and even religion. Just like we had instances of Roman Empire, influencing, controlling the culture, the socio-economic, the system of the society, even languages, the influence, right? They had a lot of influence on the local architecture, local, you could say, culture also, right? So that's how they tend to operate. So the empires, it's not just about a vast reach or a vast, like in the sense of distance and territory, but it's also about that there's a centralized authority who's exerting influence, who's exerting control, and there's a lot of interference in the socio-political, economic, even culture, religion, food, cuisine, all of that included, right? So the empire, the emperor wants to have considerable influence, and maybe even to the extent of imposing their own culture, imposing their own religion on the people, on the people of the the people of the empire, right? So this is what you can write. Again, I'm telling you, it's not about knowing the definition, it's about knowing the concept. You have to highlight, because before you set the context, how the the old empire was established, you will not be able to establish a stark difference that what does new empire or the empire of the future mean, right? So you have this, and then of course I've given you a lot of examples. You have Mongolian Empire led by Genghis Khan. You have Alexander. You have Greco-Roman Empire. You have Mughal Empire. You have Mauryan Empire. You have even British and Napoleon and all that, right? Napoleon used to call himself Emperor Napoleon. So in a way, you've got a lot of examples. The idea was that while explaining all these points, you have to, of course, pick up examples from the erstwhile empires and emperors to prove your point. Okay, so when I'm saying that they have a considerable influence over political, economic, even religion, you need to bring in, Roman Empire influence. You need to bring in, Mughal Empire influence on people and religion, and even, cuisines for that matter. Avdi cuisine, Mughal cuisine, that kind of stuff. So all of that needs to be brought in as an example. How were they built? How they are built? How are the old empires built? So they are actually, see, of course, even the old empires were also based out of human intellectual power. First, the strategy was developed. There was a concept in somebody's mind that I need to have an empire, a region, or a kingdom which is, quite big, maybe the entire earth for that matter, right? So, in a way, it also started from the aspect of mind, but earlier the method was, of course, applying force. So, how were they built? They were built out of political strategies. Somebody said to the king that, okay, now you need to start expanding your territory. Now you need to start expanding your empire. And that led to the establishment of huge empires. Then, of course, for this kind of influence, for to be actually able to defeat people, they need military and naval superior power. They need that kind of strong military, strong naval army and all that, right? So because of what? Because you cannot subjugate people just by telling that, okay, I am your emperor. You have to have influence, and you need to subjugate them. You need to sometimes even to go for wars for that. So all of that was possible only when you had strengths in the name of the naval or the military superiority. Then trade, economic practices, culture were used as tools. So then once you have established an empire through the war, through crusades, through those battles and everything being fought over, after that, to maintain the subjugation, to maintain their influence, they used to considerably influence and change and modify the political, economic, even societal system, right? So all that was used, and even culture. So there's a lot of intermingling of the cultures. There were imposition of culture, there was imposition of religion, and that's how you used to maintain an empire. But all of that is not possible today, right? In a way, but not directly. Now you cannot invade a country and call yourself an emperor. right? That's not how the things will be working nowadays. So this is your first argument. You are writing all these points to explain that what does the conventional concept of empire means and what does it actually has different concepts underneath it. So actually I have used this to set the context with the keyword empire, because you cannot jump directly to the empires of the mind. Okay, then moving on, what could be my second argument? Now, before I start discussing, I need to also establish that how do the empires of the future will look like. So I have first established that, okay, how the future, how the past empires would look like. And now the aim is to now contrast, to tell that, okay, how will, or on what basis I'm saying empires of future will be based out of empires of mind. So my second argument is, how do the empires of future look like? And then I need to, within this argument, I need to do what? I need to establish remarkable differences between the old and the new. So now I am establishing that post World War II, post the decolonization process and breaking down of the colonial empires, but it wasn't easy to give away power. So you do understand that the colonial powers, because of their, all those reasons, that why imperialism and colonialism started. You do know the reasons. It's just that you have to bring that understanding and discuss it over here, that it's not easy to give away power. Yes, because of democracy, because of decolonization, all that was happening, but the countries needed some semblance of power. They needed something to give them that security feeling. So it wasn't easy to give away power, and that's why they started doing what they knew that industrial revolution actually led to the colonization. That means the industrial progress, the scientific progress, right? Because of the raw material and all that. So that led to colonization. Similarly, a similar revolution was needed in technology and spread through the tools of trade and globalization, exerting or terming it as the name of soft power, right? So yes, you are giving up away, power, because your colonies are becoming independent countries. Democracy is being established. All countries are claiming to be sovereign. All countries are claiming to have local government, republic, form of government represented by the local people, not somebody who's, sitting thousands of kilometers away and ruling them. So all of that was very difficult for the erstwhile colonial powers, and they knew that now we need to have different kind of tool, and that kind of tool was the technological progress, because industrial revolution was also based out of technological progress. Similarly, now they had to use different kind of tools, and that tool was globalization, that tool was trade, so that through this mechanism they can now exert soft power and maintain that hegemony, maintain that superiority, maintain that feeling of that they are superior and the colonies were, or the people living in colonies were inferior. So that kind of soft power was, they started doing this, they started applying this kind of tool. Okay, so you have all of this understanding. You have to, of course, use this as argument and elaborate it, use examples. You have a lot of that, how they started establishing trade corridors, the dominance of dollar. Yes, at this point of time we are talking more about de-dollarization, but you do understand that for a very long period of time dollar has been a very important currency, and its dominance in the entire international market in the aspect of trade and all. The aspect of SWIFT, we all know the concept of SWIFT, right? So all those financial exchanges happening, like it cannot happen without a code. It has to go back to the USA, and then it from there it is approved, from there all the exchanges are being done. So that's how the dominance was there. It was still there. Maybe they were not directly ruling us, but through these all tools they were exerting, they were actually part of an empire again, right? So the empires of the future will be empires of the mind, and that's how they were applying their mind, using soft power, using other tools and techniques to influence people to establish their hegemony. So trade corridors and dollars and all that is, is the example for this part. Then you can bring in the example of Joseph Nye, or you can bring in the sort of philosophical and thinker and expert to touch to this particular argument, which is that Joseph Nye, who has coined the term soft power, has said what he has mentioned, that nations succeed through culture, values, diplomacy, and not force. So he said that eventually the countries, yes, because colonial power for 200, 300 years and all that. But then there will be a point of time where you can't exert dominance just by hard power. You need to, in the present times, bring in the aspects of soft power, and that happens through the tools of culture, through the value system, through even diplomacy, but not by force. Okay, so nations are succeeding nowadays through these kind of tools, and this has been said by Joseph Nye. Now, Antonio Gramsci, okay, he said what? That power resides in the ability to shape common sense. So actually, people started getting inclined towards those ideologies, those concepts which talks about common sense, which talks about scientific beliefs and value system. Right now, how we are influenced, towards West, because we believe that whatever West is saying is based out of science, it is based out of, logical, rational thinking, and we tend to, of course, we have started becoming, you could say, isolated. We have started becoming very disjuncted, disconnected with our own roots, with our own culture. Why? Because they started projecting this, that power resides in the ability to shape common sense, and common sense is where it is with siding with the Western culture, it is with siding with the West countries, it is with siding with the scientific and rational beliefs. So, in that way, they have started colonizing, they have started establishing their hegemony. So, now it is more about cultural hegemony using these tools of technology, of value system, of diplomacy, of scientific beliefs, which is now shaping beliefs and values, because they want to make you or they want to tell you that scientific beliefs and science-based values is what they are projecting. That is what their culture is. So the West doesn't believe in any other culture but culture of rationality, culture of science, culture of logical approach. Everything needs to be scientifically proven to be accepted. So all that is where they started, projecting this or using this as a tool of dominance, and we all have succumbed to it. And I'm not saying that we don't need to be a rational or scientific based person, but yes, that's their tool. That's how they have started, using to establish the empire. So empire of future will be empires of mind. So through mind, you have started using these all tools and techniques to control people, to make them believe that you are the one saying the truth and you are the one who is extremely rational. So this all is what you can actually discuss under the second argument, which becomes your core argument, because now you're directly discussing that how will or how do the empires of future look like, what could be its components, what could be its ideas, and how it is different from the older notion, conventional notion of empires. Now your third argument is that the empires of future, that means what are those? So actually now coming to the aspect of that, the future empires will be settled where? They will have influence over what region? So actually the empire of future are the regions displaying soft power through technology. And within this, earlier you were just mentioning that what kind of new tools. So you were comparing that the older tools were naval, military superiority, and subjugation, violence. Now the newer tool is about soft power. It's by influencing and changing the culture based on scientific beliefs, based on Western concept, based on forgetting one's own roots and culture and adopting or adapting to others' Western culture and those concepts, right? So that has been discussed for the tools and techniques. Here is where you will be directly talking about that, okay, now these soft power or the like these exertion of soft power through technology is happening where and how, right? So the countries and the regions leading in technological innovations will dominate, right? And that's what has been happening. So the empires of future will be empires of mind, because the empires of mind will be able to come up with lot of technological innovations and discoveries. Okay, these areas will house what? These areas will have research institutes, they will have the technological tech-based companies, they will have startups driving global technology adoption. And that what has become nowadays. In USA you have Silicon Valley, in Europe you have, Germany, Berlin is there, right? So many places, I would say. Stockholm is also there, right? Then you have in India, we have Bangalore, and you've got these another kind of Silicon Valleys or different forms of Silicon Valleys even in London. So all these areas are now actually having this all component, because all the human intellectual power, all the human ingenuity, all the technological innovations, discoveries happening based on the power of human mind is actually happening over here. These are the regions housing the human capital that develop the utmost achieved potential of human capital, human resource, who can go for new sort of researches, who can go for companies which innovate, which produce new products which are revolutionary, startups which believe in not going with the conventional business sense, but investing in different kinds of areas which are going to, of course, change the face of the earth. So all of this is happening, and that's how the empires of future will look like. So those countries and regions which will house this will not be the empire, but through this it will be influencing its empire, it will be influencing its power, and these areas becomes the seat of power. These areas become the seat of centralized authority, right? And because they are producing these social media platforms, they are producing all those new startups coming out with different kind of e-commerce platforms and this and that. And then what is happening, what products and what stuff they are generating, we are becoming the product, we are becoming the end user, and that's what is happening. So all that of human intellectual power being used from one place to exert dominance over the entire world. And these have become the new seats of power. These cities have become the new centralized authority, centralized power, right? So all of that needs to be elaborated under this argument. You need to bring in the discussion about the big five, their overall influence, how nowadays it's not about the any government, any queen or legitimate head of the government, exerting or calling themselves as emperor and empress, but actually it has now become the MNCs, the big companies, the big five, exerting influence, controlling people, using soft power, using technology. So you have Google, you have Amazon or Google, or the alphabet. You've got Amazon, you've got Apple, you've got Facebook, or now known as Meta. You've got Microsoft. So all this, big five MNCs and the companies are literally have become the new empires. So empires of future will be empires of mind, and they are having all the minds. Isn't this about the brain gain? All the countries producing good engineers, researchers, top scientists, isn't all of them getting poached by the various Silicon Valleys situated across the world and by these companies? Isn't this what is happening? Yes, this is what is happening. So now you've got the aspect of AI, robotics, automation, social media, all of that being used as tools to exert dominance and influence. So now it is more about the knowledge economy, knowledge-based economy, rather than, the conventional sense of influencing people through force and violence. Control over digital information, cyber security prowess, plus ability to control, save, manipulate data. This is what is giving them the power, right? This is what is soft power is nowadays. This is what is actually the real power and the real emperors in today's empire, or I would say for the future empires. And now you've got even the cultural exports, entertainment, lifestyle, cuisine, festivals, all of that is getting exported. So now it's not the influence only through military or hard power, it's about these kind of stuff too. Cultural exports, how sitting in India, you're obsessed with ramen. How sitting in India, you are more inclined towards eating sushi rather than chole bhature. Okay, nothing against it, but I'm just giving you examples, okay? So, yes, but that's what is happening, right? Like how now nobody's watching cartoons, but it's more like anime. So, all of that is what is actually the cultural export. This is how we are getting influence. Celebrating Halloween, celebrating Black Friday sales. I think it's going on right now, right? So, why? I mean, I don't even understand. I still don't know the concept behind Black Friday. So, something which was earlier even doesn't make sense to us, it's not under our culture, it's not directly influencing us, and we are part of it nowadays. So Black Friday sales and Halloween celebrations instead of Diwali, or you've got the Tomatina festival, right? Spain, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara references. I hope you all know that, right? So tomato festival, beer festival. I think in Germany you've got a beer festival, and that is happening in India also in major cities nowadays. So in a way, all that is cultural exports, and that is how people are now getting influenced. They are getting indirectly subsumed under an empire, and that empire or the emperor is who is exporting all of this culture into different cultures, right? So movies, anime, then you've got the lifestyle. Now it's more about candles. In decoration, you're using candles. In you have forgotten about the color palette. You have gone if you want to look classy, if you want to look good, then it's not about wearing colors, it's about going for muted pastels, going for muted colors. Beige has become the new black, or the new, you would say, power color. If you want to look good, if you want to look sophisticated, you want to look classy, you want to look old money, then what you're doing, you're going for beige colors. So all that is happening, and this is in a way a lot, I would not say blame, but yes, in a way a lot of soft power being used, a lot of influence being done on seemingly innocent population who don't know how they are getting brainwashed, who don't know how they are getting influenced, or how they are being subsumed into a virtual empire which is having these components. So maybe you're living in India, you're living in Southeast Asia, but you're following lifestyle of a Western country, you're following culture of a Western country, or even any other country for that matter. And you don't even identify with your own culture, your own roots, your own country, anymore. So that kind of influence in the empires is all that is happening. Now let's not get too emotional and get diverted from the topic. So I hope you got the point that in the third argument we have to, with examples, prove our point that the empires of future are those regions which are displaying soft power through technology. Earlier in the second argument, what's the difference between the second and the third argument is that in the second argument you were talking about the different tools, trade and this and that, soft power. You were just introducing the concept of soft power. Here you are proving your point, not just through the use of soft power, but also talking about those tech companies, those regions, those Silicon Valleys, which are now have become the seeds, which have become the new emperors, right? So that is how you need to establish the idea about this topic. Now moving on, the fourth argument, because see the topic, this topic, essay topic, is fairly straightforward. The empires of future will be the empires of mind. So you can't keep on just repeating empires of future, empires of mind for the every paragraph that you're writing. You have to think, you have to brainstorm about decoding the topic and writing diverse arguments, at least 3 to 4 different arguments, right? So we already discussed, we started with the simple conventional definition and discussion on did the empires of the old times look like, what were its aspects, how they were established. Then the second and the third argument was mostly about what? It was mostly about that empires of future, empires of mind, and how the new tools and techniques are being used, what is happening, the examples and all that. The fourth argument, because in this topic, I feel that though the topic never mentions the word India, but still this has a good possibility to include the fourth argument about India. So does India stand a chance? Does India as a country stand a chance to actually be the next soft power based empire, or to exert that kind of influence? So I thought that in this topic, and I've written it over here as a set of instruction in the blue, that usually unless India is one of the major keyword in the essay topic, we don't really bring the focus over India. But because this topic, I think, is very much, it's warranting a discussion that can India be that kind of empire? So earlier we were the colonized country, somebody else was ruling over us. We were the colonies, we were the part of the empire of another emperor. But do India stand any chance in the future to become or exert this kind of soft power and establish an empire which is based out of Indian human mind, or human but Indian mind, something like that? So that is where I wanted to bring this discussion. Can India be the next soft power based empire? So within this argument, you could actually discuss the strengths and the shortcomings or the lacunas, like what are the strengths that can really help us become the next, you could say, soft power based empire. And but then of course we do have some constraints. It's not that we are perfect, right? Because you can't just keep on talking about the good aspects and ignore the wrong or the bad aspects. So it doesn't happen like that. So in a way, because the question is about that, can India be that next, empire? Can India use that soft power, use that tool and technique? So yes, we do have strengths. We have cultural influence. We have spiritual influence through Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam concept, through the aspect of Gita, ISKCON, all that is happening, right? We have, of course, festivals. Diwali being celebrated in USA. Diwali as a festival now being considered under the national list of holidays in the Western countries. So all that tells us that yes, India is, being considered. India now is on that kind of level that where people have started acknowledging us on the global platform. So yes, the spiritual influence is there, the cultural influence is there, the festivals, music, Bollywood, cuisine, clothes, butter chicken, butter masala, and all those examples you can give. And how the diaspora is, Indian diaspora situated or living outside is celebrating Diwali, is actually, you could say, talking about the Diwali. Just like we have become influenced through Christmas and Halloween kind of festivals, people are, outside are also acknowledging the festivals, our festivals like Holi, Diwali. So yes, that's how, we can also influence using our soft power. Even Prada and Gucci kind of brands, copying Kolhapuri, chappal design, or, copying a lot of different things. It's not just, I think, not just Kolhapuri, but there was some other, also aspects, of like the GI tags, or, the kind of art and craft we have, the rich cultural art and craft that we have, that is being, used by those MNCs and those, those fashion companies, so-called fashion companies. Then, of course, apart from the cultural strengths, we do have that digital public infrastructure. We are using Aadhaar, we are using, like, that UPI, DigiLocker. All these concepts are being adopted by different countries. So in a way, of course, I'm not saying that USA is coming and adopting this, but in a way, just keep apart some big names, big countries. There's a lot of, small regions, smaller countries aligning with the ideology of India, aligning with the soft power of India, aligning with the ideals that Indian government or India as a whole, culture and civilization has been following. So now the aspect of, that how we are promoting Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, all those concepts, digital public infrastructure into various countries and all that. Then the economic growth potential. We are, having demographic dividend. We are the biggest market, and, in the recent times, the population has become our strength, right? It has always been our strength. It's just that, of course, we don't want demographic dividend to turn into demographic disaster. But yes, the action, like, the steps need to be taken to utilize this human resource potential that we have. But in a way, we do have potential, we do have advantage which other countries might not be having, which is the demography, which is our population, right? Then of course, even from the aspect of innovation, even from the aspect of technological progress, we are, you could say, on that correct path. We have started doing it. We are, maybe right now we are not topping the charts and topping the indexes for the innovation and, technological progress, but yes, at least the journey has started. We are still on the path to greatness. So in a way, these are our strengths. But then you could also mention about the constraints, or, not to just toot your own horn, or not to just be ultra nationalistic and patriotic. You should also talk about that, yes, there is something which is, a constraint. So India getting accepted as the next soft power based empire, India getting accepted as a country which can change the face of the earth or change global cultures or influence global cultures, has having little bit of constraint. That concept is having little bit of constraints. What are those constraints? Perception versus reality. Now, sorry, perception versus reality. So now, yes, Diwali, this and that, yoga and Bollywood and Gita, ISKCON, everything is happening. But there's always an element of discrimination. There's always an element of racism against Indians by the West. And of course, on a global platform, our reputation has taken a hit. Now, not to be too controversial or something, but yes, in a way, if we are spoken about in nice terms, there is, of course, a criticism also going behind our back. So these are, our constraints that the perception is, of course, India being, knowledge and Vishwaguru and knowledge economy and powerful and soft power and this and that. But yes, the reality might be something else. The reality is still that we are prone to discrimination. We are prone to, you could say, the aspect of racism. We lack in governance. We have a lot of corruption. Like we lack that power to say and being acknowledged by the other countries. So that kind of constraints are still there. Then we are also faltering on innovation. Yes, we do have jugaad culture and frugal innovation, but that is just a sort of one cherry on the cake, or I would say that would just be one embellishment that we have, that one just good quality, a small good quality, that yes, yeah, we are good with jugaad, we are good with frugal innovation. But what about more? What about actually being the Silicon Valley, actually being innovators, a society of innovators, a society of people who have rationality and scientific approaches? All that is I think still a long way to go for Indians. So then even in the soft power ranking, we have a lot more to go. And then we have the underutilized diaspora. Yes, the diaspora is active, the diaspora is doing this is achieving this, but in a way you do understand that they are still not there where they are supposed to be, right? Or they should be. So the underutilized diaspora and of course the overall negative perception can become the major constraint when India wants to utilize its soft power dominance, when it wants to utilize or try to become the next soft power based empire, next future empire actually. So in a way, all those constraints are there and you could bring the discussion. Please do not make this discussion very lengthy. Do not give a lot of weightage. I have given many ideas, but the idea is just to give both the sides, both the points, both the aspects of the discussion, but don't make it too lengthy because it's not about India being the topic never specifically mentioned it's, right? So actually your first, second, third argument in the sequence will have more weightage, will have more ideas, will have more examples. And this could just be instead of a counter argument, because here there's no possibility of a counter argument. So then to have a parallel perspective, I have brought in the argument of India. But please remember that your counter argument or a parallel argument or any different perspective cannot overshadow the main argument, cannot overshadow the core argument. So actually in the sequence, argument 1, 2, 3 will have more weightage, will have more words, will have more elaborations and examples. But the argument 4, which is about the India, needs to be just a short, sweet discussion, not more than 2 to 3 or maximum 4 paragraphs. Okay, so don't give more weightage to it. Now, this becomes the body content. So what would be our introduction and what could be our conclusion? Let's first discuss the conclusion. The conclusion could be that in a way, the empires of future will be empires of mind. So yes, these empires are based out of mind are talking about what? They're talking about the soft power. They're talking about the knowledge economy concept, right? And then we need to, but there's also a caution attached. We need to be cautious, cautious of one thing, that we need to avoid the situation of Aldous Huxley's novel, A Brave New World, which speaks about bioengineering, which speaks about manipulation, which speaks about, people being oblivious to what is happening, because now technology is ruling each and every aspect of life. So now the population is engineered there's no, feeling of emotions, the humanity, the humanness aspect is missing. I'm not sure if you all are aware of or not, but this the novel A Brave New World, it's a fictional novel, it's a fictional work by Aldous Huxley, and you can read about it. It's a very nice dystopian novel which talks about the stories about a future society where of course there's no country and all, but then the people living are, they are manufactured into by laboratories or in laboratories. They are bioengineered to have specific traits. They are manipulated. They are always kept under the influence of drug. And there is of course difference. There is segregation, but the segregation is on a very different terms. It's not just about caste or class. It's on very different terminologies. And then the entire society is devoid of emotions. It just wants the people to think on only the rational terms. The humanity aspect, the humaneness, the empathy, compassion is absent in that society, and that is what we want to avoid. So actually you will use this reference of this particular novel and the work, this Brave New World, to strike a caution, to bring a caution into the essay conclusion, that we need to, okay, it's good to have a lot of technological progress and innovations and all that is there, scientific progress, but we cannot lose our humanity. And through this you need to establish a sort of a cautionary statement, a cautionary idea, okay, that we need to be careful. Then Joseph Nye again has said soft power can be misused. So in a way, he has already highlighted that there is a threat that in the garb of soft power, in the garb of cultural export, in the garb of being very flexible with the idea of adaptation to different cultures, it can also be used as an element to misuse, to manipulate people. So we need to be very careful that whatever is your own indigenous culture, whatever is your own root, you should not forget that. It's okay to be flexible. It's okay to adapt to new cultures. It's okay to, take the best parts out of the other culture, but never forget your own roots, right? So the soft part, through the soft part discussion, you are bringing this entire discussion into the conclusion, just to strike a caution that yes, the empires of future will be the empires based out of human mind, human intellectual, scientific innovations, discoveries, but one should not lose their humanity. One should not lose empathy and compassion. Just like Gandhi's one principle is there now, out of the 7 principles you have one principle, science without humanity. So if you're having empires of future based out of empires of mind, based on empires of mind, then it needs to have the human angle attached to it. Okay, then what we are undergoing is the cognitive colonization. Earlier the regions were getting colonized, the countries were getting colonized. Now it's about cognitive colonization. Your mind is being manipulated, your mind is being subjugated, your mind is being enforced to accept defeat and not have your own independent thought process and thinking, but you are being actually cognitively influenced and manipulated, and nations are losing their intellectual autonomy. There are many nations which have forgotten their own roots, their own culture, right? And they're adopting to new. Then of course you have patent monopolies, because from the concept of big five and all those coming MNCs and all, so you have got patent monopolies, the culture is being subjugated. The surveillance capitalism is also that concept you need to bring in. And then you can end through 2 different quotes you can bring in, because of course when you talk about this topic, if you don't bring in the concept of Yuval Noah Harari, or you don't bring in his quote, then it becomes very incomplete, because he has been vocal about such topics, right? So Harari has said that when data knows you better than you know yourself, authority shifts from humans to algorithms. So, big data, mining, data manipulation, changing thought processes, when data knows you better. So those social media platforms, those e-commerce platforms, those food companies, food delivery companies, all that, they tend to know you better because they are, analyzing your behavior. The data analysis is being given, going on a large scale. The authority shifts from humans to algorithms. So now you're getting trapped into algorithms, your behavior is being predicted, and instead of having that element of self-control, now you're very much prone to getting manipulated and influenced without even you realizing that what is happening to you. So yes, This is something that's a very nice quote, very relevant to a lot of topics, social media, even influence of culture and sorry, influence of Western, influence and all those, topics you can easily brought in. Like you can use this quote, okay? Then Neil Postman has said, Orwell feared those who would ban books. So actually, let me give you the context because just randomly jumping to the quote will not help you. So actually, we have two famous authors, Orwell, George Orwell, who has written 1984 and Animal Farm, and then you have Aldous Huxley, who has written A Brave New World, okay, which I have mentioned earlier. So now Neil Postman has compared both the works, George Orwell's concept, his fear about people getting whitewashed, brainwashed, brainwashed and manipulated, and they are not able to differentiate what's truth, what's being presented to them as truth. So Orwell's concepts is more about that because through his books 1984 and even Animal Farm, he has talked about these concepts only. And then Aldous Huxley. So Neil Postman has compared both the authors' works and their thought process to give this quote. So actually, he says Orwell, that means George Orwell, feared those who would ban books, but Aldous Huxley feared that no one would want to read them. So, isn't this what is happening to us? So, rather than banning books, now we live in a society which has not read books in a very long period of time. Yes, you are UPSC aspirants. That's why you're reading. You're reading a lot of stuff. Because your work is to gain knowledge. But just think about your other, friends, maybe another, other people who are working someplace. How many books are they reading? Their knowledge has become stagnant. They are not actively. Their source of knowledge is social media platforms. It's Instagram. It's Facebook. They are getting the news from there. And of course, we all know how authentic, how true the news presented on social media platforms is. So, in a way, Neil Postman has said this, that Orwell feared that governments will ban good books, they will try to control your thinking. But actually, what is happening is what has Aldous Huxley mentioned, that no, they will influence you, they will manipulate you, they will change your thought process, that nobody would want to read books. And that was what was happening in the Brave New World, in this dystopian novel, in the world of A Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley. That was what is happening. So again, it's a very nice quote to compare two different authors and their thought process and their belief system. Orwell believed that the governments, if they want to control you, they want to manipulate you, want to wrongly influence you, they will ban the true books, they will ban the truth, they will not let the truth come out. But actually, what is happening is in the Huxley's world, you have been influenced and manipulated in such a way that you don't want to read those books, and that's why there's no need to ban the books, right? So that is what is, I think, happening right now. So in a way, it's a very nice, very relevant quote, highlighting caution, highlighting that yes, it's good to have empires of future based out of empires of mind, but it should not be that we are becoming too much over dependent on the intellectual power of human, to the aspect of losing our own humaneness, our empathy, our compassion and humanity, right? So this is how you can conclude this particular essay. Let's jump back to the introduction. How could we start this particular essay? So because if you remember, my first argument was talking about the old empires, even my introduction should be in the same contextual reference, right? Because then only it will make sense. So my introduction would be starting that how the olden empires look like, what did they actually do to establish such a huge empire, a large empire, and through that, my first argument, coming back to the original concept of empires, which tools and tactics they were using, and then moving on to the remaining part of the essay, the actual phrases and core arguments of the essay. So my introduction would be again history based, okay, to bring the same context. And I would maybe start with the Alexander story, who was a Macedonian king. So he was having all the access, he like his army, his armed forces, of course, it was very, very important, it was very powerful, and on the basis of that power only he was able to establish an empire, right? He was established himself as an emperor. So the light and heavy infantry, cavalry, artillery, all that aspects of strength he had, then he used to siege the weapons. And on the basis of all this, having the power of infantry, having the power of cavalry, having the power of, battalions of, well trained soldiers, along with the wisdom imparted by his tutor Aristotle. So if all you know, I hope you all know that Alexander had a tutor, and that tutor was none other than the Western classical philosopher Aristotle. And based on all of this, he promoted Greek language, art, and architecture. So actually, Alexander, while establishing his empire through, of course, wars and everything, he was also using the element of cultural diffusion. He was imposing the language, he was imposing the Roman Greco, aspects of culture, and that is what is called as Hellenization. So you might have heard of, Hellenic architecture and all influence of Hellenic architecture. So all that is called as Hellenization. So I will start my introduction with the story of Alexander, how he established his empire, what were his strengths, how the wisdom he used of his tutor Aristotle, and on the basis of that, after establishing the empire, after removing the earlier rulers, the other rulers, he was actually also using the elements of cultural diffusion to turn those people into the permanent inhabitants, or permanent, you would say, loyalist or loyal people of the empire, right? So that is what is called as Hellenization. But then this is a very normal story. To convert this normal introduction into a eye-catching or an impressive introduction, what would I write is that after elaborating the story of Alexander, I will use this sentence towards the very end. But one can't help and ponder, if Alexander would have been born in 21st century, how would he have built his empire? So yes, we started the discussion. My introduction started with the story of Alexander, how and what he did, and the cultural diffusion, all that is there, his strength of artillery, cavalry, and all that. But then one needs to ponder that one needs to think, or one needs to be curious enough to ask that if Alexander was born in 21st century, how would he have established his empire? And the answer to this question would become your argument 2 and 3, based on soft power, based on technological progress. Maybe, we don't know, and this is just for jokes purpose, maybe Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are the new age Alexanders, right? So in a way, this is how you can make your essay introduction interesting. You started off with a name which was very common, everybody knows about Alexander. So there, of course, you're not doing something very different. But when you use this sentence, you can make a normal introduction look impressive, right? So you can also end your introduction with this kind of statement. The second type of introduction could be that you could again bring in Yuval Noah Harari's quote, and the quote is actually that previously the main sources of wealth were gold, horses, farmlands, and oil wells. Today, the main source of wealth is knowledge, and that is what is being gained and used by data mining, by big data, by data manipulation. So all that is being done by the new age companies and new age colonial emperors and empires. Okay, so on that note, on this entire thing, the discussion of the topic 2 of section A gets over. Now we move on to the section B topic, which is topic number 6. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but to test the character, give him power. Now, on the prima facie, this looks like a very simple topic, nothing too cryptic about it, nothing too difficult to understand. You understand all the keywords: adversity, character, power. But then what I realized was that most of the students, while writing this topic, they forgot the first phrase of the topic, which says nearly all men can stand adversity. Most of the students have done what mistake is that they have focused on the second part of the phrase. So if you want to test a character, give him power. But equally important is the first part of the phrase. And if you have been brainstorming along with me, I would recommend that you should pause the video, brainstorm few ideas, and then you can see the discussion. Meanwhile, I'll just take a short water break. So just 2 minutes for it. Right. So coming back again, so just like I mentioned, because when I interacted with a lot of students who had chosen this topic in the year of 2024, they focus more on the power and the character aspect, and they totally missed writing at least one or two argument about the first part of the phrase, which is nearly all men can stand adversity. So you can't afford to ignore any keyword, any particular phrase, even if it's a short phrase, even if the topic starts from there. So always try and include at least minimum one argument based out of the one part of the essay topic. Okay, so what are my keywords here? Of course, men stand adversity, test character, give power. Okay, so not just adversity, character, and power. It's about standing adversity, testing the character, and if you want to test the character, you have to give power to them. Then, what are the themes or the categories? Of course, character, hashtag ill effects of power, and hashtag power corrupts. Right. So, actually, from that Lord Acton's quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right. So from that you could understand the theme of this topic. Now when I read the topic for the first time, what ideas are coming into my mind? So adversity, part and parcel of life, because it's being said that nearly all men can stand adversity. That means it's trying to say that in a way it's normal to accept adversity and difficult situations as part of human life, because nearly all men can stand adversity. They can suffer, they can still survive even after encountering difficult situations and circumstances in their life. So that means my first idea is that the adversity is part and parcel of life. And then of course from the topic, the latter half of the phrase of the essay topic, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Then power as ultimate test of one's character, value, ethics, because power magnifies the inner character. So actually, it's not about power corrupting the character, but power can magnify your inner, the corest of your belief and the values and the ethics you hold. So actually, power doesn't corrupt directly, it acts as a magnifier. It acts as the mirror to your actual belief system. So power magnifies inner character, and adversity tests endurance, and power tests essence. That means what is your essence? What is your inner belief and value system? So adversity can test how much you can endure, how much you can tolerate, how much you can suffer. But power tests your essence, what you are inside, what is your core value and belief system. That's what is being tested by the power. So these all ideas came into my mind. Fairly, I would say, straightforward topic, nothing too, very difficult, I would say. So let's start with the first argument. And again, I would always have my first argument as which is used to set the context. So because I said that nearly all men can stand adversity, the topic is assuming that adversity or challenges and adversities or difficult situations and circumstances is part of human life. So my first argument is actually in sync with it, that human life is filled with challenges and adversities. Adversity is a moral equalizer. Okay, so in a way, every human being goes through adversities and challenges in their life. Of course, the degree, the nature of the adversity, or the degree of the challenge can vary person to person. But yes, most of the human, nobody has a rosy life, nobody has a easy life. Everybody goes through their own sets of challenges and adversities. So adversity is a moral equalizer, and hardships force people to be humble, cooperative, disciplined, and accepting, in a way that when you are encircled, when you are entrapped in a difficult situation, you will act humble, you will act cooperative, because when you are in a difficult situation, the aim is to survive, the aim is to just bear somehow, and for that you know that you cannot be arrogant, so you become humble. You become cooperative, because uncooperative will not help you survive in that particular situation. It will not help you tackle that adversity. So all of these things, humble, cooperative, disciplined, accepting of life, accepting the entire situation, all that is, part and parcel of human nature, becomes part and parcel of human nature when they undergo adversity. So in a way, that is why it's said that nearly all men can stand adversity, and adversity, these kind of hardships force people to be these humble, accepting and all that, because adversity demands survival and not character revelation. During the adversity, you just have to survive, and for survival, we are going to opt for anything. While opting for that survival tactics, we need to be humble, cooperative, and all that. So your real character will never be revealed when you're undergoing adversity, because good, arrogant, egoistic people have been known to become humble when they are undergoing bad times, when they are facing bad times in their life. So actually, adversity is never a test of your character. It just tests how you are able to survive through that. So behavior, all the behavior which is during the times of adversity is being guided by necessity, instinct, and social expectation. So because it's a necessity to survive, right? Then you are actually, driven by instinct, because your instinct, the human instinct, is always to survive. Okay, so anyhow, your body, your hormones, your chemicals, your mind will help you survive in any kind of difficult situation, right? So all that is there. Resilience is bad. That means, when you're going through adversities, resilience, the concept of resilience is biological and cultural trait. How it is biological? Because we do know the concept of survival of the fittest, right? So that is there. And the cultural trait, because through cultures, we have seen most of the cultures appreciate the aspect of struggle, because they believe that struggle builds character. Struggle builds, good character, basically. If you're not undergoing struggle, you would never come out to be a good person. जैसे बोलते हैं ना कि वो सोने को तपाने वाला जो concept है, like in Hindi, right? I don't want to use that particular, muhavra, but I hope you get the concept. So struggle builds character is appreciated in, in most of the cultures. So resilience is biological plus a cultural trait which is present in most of humans, right? In all of humans, actually, for that matter. So yes, human life is filled with challenges, and adversity demands survival, and that is why, because of all of this, the most of the men can stand adversity. But if you really want to test the character, you have to give him power. That would be our forthcoming argument. Now, when I'm discussing this adversity wala argument, the idea is to bring a lot of examples, because when, of course, you are giving these arguments, you're giving the analysis, you have to bring in examples of people who have endured challenges, who have endured difficult situations, who have overcome adversities in their life. We can start from here. Of course, there's a lot more examples. I just wanted to give you something which is common yet unconventional to use in essays. So yes, we have Guru Tegh Bahadur, because recently we have, his, I think, a major event surrounding his life was being celebrated. So Guru Tegh Bahadur, he endured torture for religious freedom, right? Then Epictetus, he was a Stoic philosopher. So Epictetus was born a slave. He endured physical torture that left him crippled, and he developed philosophy on enduring suffering. So because of his, his experience of, surviving through adversity, because he was crippled, he was tortured so much, he was a slave. So in a way, he developed a philosophy. After surviving, he developed a philosophy on enduring suffering. So you have, examples of these two, great persons. You have Epictetus, who is a Stoic philosopher. You've got Guru Tegh Bahadur. Okay, and then here also I have given you in this, box also I have given you example. The example is Frida Kahlo. I'm not sure if you guys have heard or not. People who have interest in art, they must be knowing the name of Frida Kahlo. She was a celebrated Mexican painter. Okay, but she had a lot. Her life was really, really challenged. I never knew, like when I came to first read her story, I was really taken aback that such kind of, adversities comes into somebody's life, right? So Frida Kahlo, she was a Mexican painter, and she endured physical suffering because she was born healthy, but I think she met with an accident, And post that accident, she, of course, suffered physical disability, and it led to a lot of suffering. Like she was not able to sit properly, like, how the disability life is, how the disabled life is. So physical suffering, and she turned into creative genius. She was, of course, a gifted painter earlier also, but then to survive through all of this adversity, she started painting, and her paintings became very famous, right? So of course we have example of Frida Kahlo also. Then, just like I mentioned, that quote, the empires of the future will be empires of mind, was said by Winston Churchill. This quote is actually said by Abraham Lincoln. So, nearly all men can stand adversity, but to test the character, give him power, is actually said by Abraham Lincoln. And if you're not good with quotes, you can remember the name and you can use this quote in your future essays. Okay, so again, if we have mentioned the name of Abraham Lincoln, of course, we all know his life again has been testament to challenges, to a lot of different kind of failures and setbacks. So Abraham Lincoln suffered, of course, he underwent poverty, he underwent a lot of setbacks and failures, he even underwent depression, and still he came out to be a a empathetic person, a patient person, of course, the president of the United States of America. So all that, he turned his adversities, he turned the difficult situations and circumstances into a positive part of his life, right? So that is the first argument, where you talk about the adversity, you talk about that human life has adversities and circumstances in, of course, varying degrees. You cannot miss this discussion. You can't just totally avoid the first half of the essay topic and jump directly to the aspect of, if you want to test the man's character, give him power. No, that would be your second, third argument, and henceforth, right? Okay, so now let's move on to our second argument. Now, second argument is tackling the second part of the phrase, which says that yes, adversity can test your endurance and power the essence. So actually, adversities test how much you can endure, but your real character, your real essence, a person's real core belief system, a core character is being tested by the power. So people behave decently because circumstances restrain them. So when you're undergoing adversity, you tend to behave decently, you tend to behave humble because the circumstances restrain them. As opposed to when you're given power, when you're given authority, now there are no circumstances, now there's nothing restraining you, there's nothing stopping you, and that is why it reveals everything about you. So because we have to justify now that why we are saying power is going to reveal the character, why you want to test the person's character through a through giving him power, not something else, not why not wealth, why not something else for that matter, why power only? Because power removes restraints. When you're getting power, when you're operating from a sense of superiority, you have power, authority, it removes all kinds of restraints, and that is why it reveals the true core of a person. So in a way, now here you can start your discussion discussing the core argument that people behave decently, circumstances restrain them, as opposed to power, because it removes the restraints and that reveals the true core of a person. Power can become what it becomes when you give power, it becomes magnifier of inner character. So actually, instead of blaming power that it has the propensity or it has the possibility to corrupt the behavior or the nature, actually it magnifies your inner character. Then it mirrors your moral fiber, whatever is your own morality, whatever is your ethics and beliefs and value system, it mirrors that, it tries to magnify and mirror that. Then it is a, of course, it becomes temptation for corruption. So when you get power, there's a lot of temptation to do as you please, do as you like, not follow any moral or any code of ethics or for that matter morality. So that is there. Then burden requiring wisdom, and in a way power is also a burden, it's a responsibility, right? So it's not something that you need to actually feel happy about it. In a way, wise people term power as a burden, as a responsibility, and that has been said by Marcus Aurelius. So actually, for all these points, I have given you examples how magnifier of inner character. So of course, very famous Mahatma Gandhi's example can be commonly used. So you can use it in the essay, no problem. But then I have given you one more unconventional example, the king of Bhutan, Jigme Singye Wangchuk. So he has, of course, he we could say would forego power for the benefit of people. He helped establish democracy in Bhutan, and of course, we all know the story of Bhutan as a country, right? So actually, when good people, when morally strong people are given power, it doesn't corrupt them. They use that power too for the benefit of society and people. So actually, it's a magnifier of inner character. Mirror of moral fiber, you can bring in the example of Lal Bahadur Shastri, his resignation during the rail accident and his fast during the food crisis in the country. All those examples you already know, those are common examples you can bring in. Temptation for corruption, it is impossible to know when and how much the fish drank water. Similar is the art of stealing, or similar is the act of stealing government money by officials. So this is the quote by Chanakya, right? That it's very difficult to judge that the fish is drinking how much of water, right? Because it is living in the water. So it's very difficult to distinguish how much water it is consuming. So similarly, it is very difficult to judge that the government officials who've got a lot of power and authority, who are possessing a lot of money, are they stealing or not? So actually, it is very difficult to know that when and how much the government money is being stolen or is being, is actually, being stolen by the officials or not. So this is something that it becomes a temptation for corruption, just like you can't judge a fish. So, and then burden requiring wisdom is actually, it has been said by Marcus Aurelius. Okay, he's again a Stoic king, Stoic philosopher and Stoic king, right? So philosopher king actually. So in a way, you could bring this argument, you can bring this example. Okay, now your third argument is why power becomes the real test of character, because power has a multiplier effect. So here we just sort of, the second argument is in a way connecting your first argument where you were just talking about the adversity, and now we are moving towards talking about how power should be used as a test of character, why it should be used as a test of character. So in between, it is a transitioning argument, which is this one. Okay, so how adversity can test endurance and power tests your essence, and that is why how it is acting like a test in all of these examples you can write about. Now, the real argument is that why power becomes the real test of character, because power has a multiplier effect. Then power creates asymmetry. When you are a powerful person, you're not accountable to your weak subordinates. You're not accountable to powerless people. You're not accountable to weak. So actually, you feel like that you are the sun. You are the center of the universe. You are the sun among the planets and the stars. And that's why, because power has a element, it has the power has the power to create a symmetry. In the sense, the one who has power can do a lot of stuff and be not accountable to any single person. So there's a symmetry, like there's a asymmetry, which is the person holding the power can do a lot of things, which as versus with the person who hasn't got power, right? So that power asymmetry creates a possibility to for non accountability, for opaqueness, right? Power removes it removes pressure of survival. I'm so sorry, I just read it in a wrong way. So power removes pressure of survival. One acts from core beliefs and values. So as compared to adversity, which was creating the question of survival, that will you be able to survive through that adversity or not, power just removes that pressure. Now you don't have to be goody goody. Now you don't have to be a good and a morally strong person. You can be anybody because you've got power. So that is how, why people sort of blame power for the change in behavior, but actually it just removes the pressure of survival, and then people start acting from what they actually believe in. Earlier they were wearing a mask, they were just projecting that they are a good person, they are humble, they are cooperative, they are very wise. But then once power comes, that mask slips off. You don't have to show that you're a humble person. You need to just be yourself. You need to act from your own inner core belief and value system. Then it of course offers opportunities for the exploitation. Temptation increases. So power, why we are blaming or why we are telling that power is a test of character, because it offers opportunities for exploitation. When you have got a lot of power, it creates a lot of avenues where you don't have to be accountable, you don't have to answer to anybody, you don't like you're just free to do whatever you feel like. So that's how the opportunity is there for exploitation, and for, of course, the temptation to um, exploit, temptation to use power for corruption and all that increases. Then there's also illusion of invincibility. Now, because of the gaining of the power, the ego gets a boost, there is moral blindness, and you feel that you're invincible, you are the sun. So that is why it becomes a true test of character, because power creates all these aspects where it tends to feel that now there's nobody to stop you, there's nobody to restrain you, everything is for you, you are the sun, and everybody else are the planets or the stars. So in a way, you could bring in the example of Indradev, the ego. If you're discussing this moral blindness, or if you're discussing the aspect of invincibility, you can bring in the example of Indradev, from the Hindu religion, that how, he's also got this misconception about himself. Then, for, of course, to prove all of these arguments, you've got examples. You've got Roman Emperor Nero, you've got Hitler, Stalin, you've got Elizabeth Holmes, you've got the Satyam scam, all those scammers you can bring in. Okay, so Machiavelli has said what? It is much safer to be feared than loved in if one must choose. So actually, in a way, it acts as a short, small counter argument that when you're having the access to power, when you're a powerful person, sometimes it's better to be feared than to be loved, because and because it is said by the Machiavelli, who's the statecraft expert. So uh, in a way, it is believed that, because we need to be accommodative of the other stance also, it is believed that yes, that for a king, for an emperor, for any person who's wielding power, who's actually having the power, even to the extent of, you can extrapolate this understanding to the head of the family. That's why in earlier times, we used to be afraid of our fathers, we used to be afraid of the grandfathers, we used to be afraid of the person who's the head of the family, because it is believed that it's better to be feared than to be loved if you want to maintain control. So to maintain that control, they are using power in a way which creates opaqueness, which creates, and that's why the elders earlier never showed emotions, they never hugged children, right? I'm talking about the previous generations, not nowadays. Okay, and all that belief was there. So Machiavelli, it is much safer to be feared than to be loved. If one has to choose, it is better to be feared than to be loved. So power also distorts your moral compass, it forces you to choose. If there's a choice, you would always want to be feared than to be loved, because out of fear people will obey you, out of fear people will not question you, out of fear people will not hold you accountable for your actions. But if there's an element of love and care and affection, then people will start questioning you. You have to maintain transparency. You have to be accountable. So that is why, the experts say it like this way. Okay. Now let's moving on. Let's move on to the aspect of the another argument. Then now, because we are done with discussing adversity, we are done with discussing that, okay, why power is only the aspect of the true test of character, how the character is getting tested, why it is getting tested, all those kind of examples. We come to the argument where we want to discuss who should yield power. So in a way, because the discussion behind the entire topic is about the leadership, right? Of course, power is always by the leaders, it's never by the common man. So actually, in reality, who should yield power? Should it be given to a morally corrupt person? Or in a way, through this argument, I want to bring in the philosophical aspect. Okay, because in the initial, when we are discussing, usually what I do for other philosophical topics, my initial argument is always about the setting the context through philosophy, through some thinker, through some theory. But in this topic, it wasn't a possibility. So now, later on, through the different thinkers and thoughts of the thinkers and ideas of the thinkers, that how should a leader look like, how should a leader be, the power should be utilized in what way, This is what my argument, fourth argument, is all about. So now I'm trying to justify through the theories of thinkers and philosophers that who is an ideal person to yield power, who should be given power. Okay, so that's my question, because through this question I will be trying to justify what philosophers and thinkers have talked about. So there is a very important concept by Plato which is called as philosopher king. Only those who do not desire power should wield it. So actually Plato has said that those who, this is such an ironical statement, right? It's a big irony in itself, that those who do not desire power should wield it. So actually people who desire power would want to get power. Those who don't want power, why would they seek power? But yes, it's said that actually that person should be made the leader, a powerful person who would not misuse, who would not desire power. His innermost, his ultimate desire is not power, maybe something else. He wants to be wisdom, he wants to be a wise person, right? So that kind of person should be a king or should be the powerful person. So he should be a lover of wisdom as opposed to a slave of appetite and a lover of honor. So actually both these qualities are bad. So one should not be given power who is a slave to appetite. And this, appetite here is not just food, it's for other, crimes and all kinds of corruption. So who is a slave to desire, who is a slave, anybody can manipulate his behavior by manipulating the desires, right? So he should not be a slave for appetite, he should not be a slave for desires, and he should also not be a lover of honor, because when you manipulate people in the name of honor, you can of course be manipulated, you can be easily influenced, right? So he should also not be a lover of honor, he should simply be a person who's lover of wisdom, who is a wise person, who wants to seek wisdom. So that person will handle power ethically and responsibly. So in this way, you could actually justify the concept of philosopher king and try to say that who should ideally be the person yielding the power. And this is what another quote, the measure of a man is what he does with power. So a very famous quote by Plato, that you actually can measure a man, in the sense you can know the personality of a person, the real measure, the real test of a person is what he does with power. So again, a very relevant quote for this particular topic. True. Then we have some different concepts. So the contemporary concepts about leadership, or about who should yield power, who should become a powerful person, who should yield society and humanity, is the concept of servant leadership. You might have heard of this many times. So Robert Greenleaf has given the concept of servant leadership, leaders who serve first, who tend to uplift others. So actually the concept of servant leadership is a leader who's leading the people, but in his mind and his ethos, it's more about serving the people, it's about uplifting the humanity, uplifting society and other people, rather than serving himself. Okay, so there's a concept of servant leadership. Then of course you have the concept of transformational leadership, where the person should be given power, that person should be made a leader who has an element of, who wants to transform societies by inspiring higher ideals. So transformational leadership is more about transforming society, transforming humanity by aspiring to higher moral, ethical ideals. Okay, so that is what the concept is. And then you can easily use this quote, empires rise and fall based on rulers' character. That is why it's very important to have a ethically strong person who should be given power, because it's very important. Empires can rise and fall because of the ruler's character. And of course, that is why the Plato's philosopher king concept comes into play. Okay, so this is your argument. Now here this topic gives you the possibility of a slight, not a very direct counter argument, like just 180-degree opposite counter argument, but it gives you the possibility of a slight nuanced perspective, which is that weak character can neither endure adversity nor can handle power. So actually, because the hint is, I have written over here, it's upon you how you use it. This particular argument, it's upon you, in the sense that it's not compulsion to include this argument in your essay discussion, but in your essay, writing, because there's a hint because it says nearly all men. If you know me, if you know my way of teaching you essay, you know that every keyword is important for me. Every word is actually a keyword and every word is important for me. So I will not just focus on near all men can stand adversity, but nearly all men. So there's a hint that nearly all men can stand adversity. That means not all men can stand adversity. Then who are the men who cannot even handle adversity nor can handle power? And that is my counter argument over here. So weak character can neither endure adversity nor can handle power, and because both are test of humans character, albeit of course in different ways, in different degrees. So you want to test a man's character, you want to test how a human would react, how a man or person would react. Give him adversity, put him into a challenging situation. That's why you might have seen people in challenging situation tend to retort or tend to react in a very different way. So is he reacting or is he responding? That's also the way to test the man's character, right? And in a way, of course, power to hai hi, like the very best way is to give him power. But do you think everyone has the access to power? Can you test every person's character by giving him power? No, not every common person, not every common man has access to power. So in a way, adversity can also be used to check a man's character, check a man's, ethical and moral or the inner core of the person. So weak character can neither endure adversity nor power, and because in a way both test humans' character. But of course, the testing of character, the methodology, the technique is different in a varying degrees of course. So in the same context, I have Helen Keller. Helen Keller, um, a very famous example. I have used it many times. So Helen Keller, of course, she was a blind, deaf, and not exactly dumb. Like she was able to speak, but because if you're not able to hear and know the sounds, of course, you will not be able to speak. So initially, she was not able to speak. So she was basically blind and deaf person, and her tutor helped her, gain the knowledge, and then she of course became a very wise person. She became a very famous person. She contributed a lot back to society. So Helen Keller has given this quote: character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be string tuned. Okay, so sorry, can be strengthened. Okay, so character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened. I'm so sorry. I think I thought that it was trying to say the string and the tuning, because I've heard of that quote also. So yes, character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened. That means the soul can be made strong only when you're actually going through the trials and tribulations in life. Not everyone has access and opportunity to be in power. So actually forging of man's good character happens in adversities, and that is why not almost or all of the man can stand adversity. It's said nearly. Okay, that is why that became my hint to include this argument. Okay, and that becomes the last of the argument, and because then we wrap up the essay, we move on to the conclusion. So for the conclusion, I want to touch upon the relevance of power in contemporary times, because how is this any quote which is said centuries or years earlier, decades earlier? This quote has been said by Abraham Lincoln. So how is this still relevant today? So in a way, this could be a part of your body content, or if you have not been able to use this argument, use this idea in body content, you can bring it in the conclusion. That is, in a way, touching upon that what's the relevance of power in contemporary times. So leaders, be it political or economic leaders, be it tech giants, be it the social reformers, the activists, the experts, thinkers, media power, all of these people working in all these fields can be termed as leaders. And in a way, whatever power has come to them through the aspect of the position they hold, they need to be very cautious with that power, and it is actually a test of their character too, right? So nowadays the leaders, all those leaders can be anybody person, anyone working in the political economic field, the person who can be termed as tech giants, the owners of the tech tech companies and all. all of that hold power, and that is why it's very important that all of them should be cautious in how they are using the power. Okay, then crisis of integrity worldwide. So you can bring in the again the contemporary elements, that there's a crisis of integrity going on worldwide. We are seeing a lot of corruption, scams, and dishonesty by the people. That is why it's very necessary that we should understand, we should know who should be given power, right? Who should wield power? So we need democracy and, of course, strong institutions. And in a way, you can use the example of Jacinda Ardern as a role model, how she, while being the Prime Minister of New Zealand, how she conducted the politics, how she, behaved, and she had power, but she never misused it. She was a true, leader who used compassion, who used empathy, along with the power vested in her by the position, the authority, to actually help the society, to build the community for New Zealand, right? So you can use Jacinda Ardern as a good example. Then, of course, William Gaddis, has given a very prominent, very, relevant quote: power doesn't corrupt people, people corrupt power. So instead of Lord Acton's power corrupts absolutely, that quote, you can use this, that power actually doesn't corrupt people. It's people who corrupt power. It's people who misuse power for their own benefit. Power is a neutral concept, but the person wielding the power, the person using that status, using that power, actually has the potential to corrupt it, right? So William Gaddis has said this. Again, you can use this to present a different perspective. And towards the end, to actually conclude your essay, you can use the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. So poem If is actually, it's a long poem. Of course, it has various connotations and various meanings and interpretations, but it has, one major meaning where it has been said. It is very relevant to, essays based on leadership, based on, the power also. And it talks about that if you're maintaining your cool and calm, even when the entire world is losing theirs, in the sense that, in the times of trouble, in the times of adversities, if you're maintaining your cool, your, wisdom, then, the entire world is for you. Yeah, you will rule the entire world. That's what it's trying to say. So the poem If is, very relevant for topics which has essence of themes of leadership, power, because the poem focuses on one particular meaning, one particular aspect, which talks about that if you want to come out as a strong person, you want to come out as a person who can rule over the world, you need to have a head which is calm. When everybody around you is losing theirs, you need to have a calm head. You need to be ethical, you need to be moral, and then the all of the world will belong to you. So it's a very beautiful poem. You can use it in a lot different ways, but yes, for these kind of themes of leadership, these kind of themes of, power and character testing, it is very, very relevant. So please read the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, and you don't have to mug up the entire poem. You can just mug up few stanzas to use it in your essay. Okay, so that concludes our essay, but then of course we are left with the introduction. So for this topic, in a very easy way, because the topic is talking about power, adversity, and all that, so you can use two contrasting personalities. Okay, so what I've done is that I have given you two different types of introduction based on personality only, because adversity, power is mostly, tackling with the human aspect, humanity aspect, human character. So then either what you can do is you can bring two different personalities, contrast their behavior, contrast their interaction with power. Or in the second way, what you can do, you can use the same personality, but compare the two different phases. The first phase where the individual did not have the power, and the second phase where he did, got the power, and how he misutilized it, misappropriated it, right? So contrasting personalities, you can have Ashoka versus Tughlaq. So, the great Ashoka after the transformation, you can, of course, you have to focus on the transformed Ashoka post Kalinga War. Okay, so Ashoka after transformation, which happened at the peak of his power, and what he realized post Kalinga War, that needs to be brought in, as compared to Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who, of course, he was detached from reality, he was tyrannical, he did not know what to do, and came out as a very bad, king. So you need to contrast. You need the story, you know the stories, you can cross reference it from the history that you read, and you can bring it as an introduction. The second type of that, you can use Napoleon, and you can contrast his personality before he got power versus after he got power. And he became an expansionist emperor. And earlier he was what? He was a revolutionary reformer. But then from a revolutionary reformer, he turned into an of course, the power got to him, and then he turned into an expansionist emperor, of course, who was subjugating the population, the people. So in a way, you can use these kind of examples, or you can use such kind of introductions for your essay. That concludes my discussion. Okay, and because we have discussed the conclusion also, we have discussed the introduction, so this can be the end of the discussion for the topic 6. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but to test the character, give him power. So I hope you learned something today. And yes, I'm committing that we will continue the series. Hopefully, there should not be a long pause again. And if you have if you have any feedback, any improvements, anything to say to me, you can always write down in the comments, and even you can get in touch with me through my Telegram ID, which is given in the channel's bio, in the details of the channel. So happy learning. I hope you learned something, and all the best. Study well. Keep on practicing essays. Keep on writing essays. Take care. Bye-bye.